Hopefully you can all read. The reason we're here in this session is to talk about the market conditions and how they're shaping long-term business strategy. You're welcome to talk about Europe if you want to, but I'm not going to put an obligation on that. Look at those heads going the other way.
Neither football either.
Right. Before the events of this week, the intention was to talk about how things like what we've been talking about today, technological advances, consumer behaviour, industry consolidation, are affecting the current and future business marketplace. How will companies be evolving and adjusting their business? And what do these changes mean for media businesses? I mean, in a way, I'd sum that up is this group has got the challenging task of bringing a lot of it together. The other challenge is that we've got two quite diverse approaches, which is great because we cover two ends of the spectrum. I think we'll probably move from a more production-orientated approach through to a delivery and consumer-oriented approach. But I'm going to do the same as I've done in previous sessions and do ask for a little bit of self-introduction and a few comments so that you know where each of our panelists is coming from. And I started from the other end before, so I'll start from the other end again. Neil, you start, introduce yourself and tell us what you think are the key points that you want to share with our audience.
Okay, I'm Neil Maycock from SAM, and SAM, as you probably know, is the consolidation of multiple media technology companies in the UK, I was going to say, and Europe.
You said it.
Yes. And we've fairly recently, since the formation of the new brand and the businesses coming together, we've created two business units inside SAM. One is what we would call infrastructure, so that's both baseband SDI and IP infrastructure. And then we've created a media software solutions division, which is the part of the company that I run. And we explicitly wanted to highlight the fact that we were creating a software division because of the many reasons that have been talked about today in terms of, migrating from fixed infrastructure to agile software solutions, whether that's in-house data centers or in the cloud, and basically allowing or responding to our customers' requirement to become more agile and be able to scale their businesses. And what we really see the challenge being there is they have to get more content more rapidly to consumers. They're now competing with the time to market of social media. And they need to scale to many, many platforms now. So broadcast being one potential output, but obviously there's many other forms that media is being consumed on. And then one thing we've not touched on too much yet today is there's agility in terms of the technology, and we all like talking a lot about technology in terms of the people that have been talking. But also I think there's a commercial agility that we need to address as well. So we are looking at, within our software division, not only about how we get agile software, but the commercial models around that. And what I mean by that is when you have the big cloud providers like Amazon, who are now starting to broker unused capacity at competitive rates, how can we enable our customers, for instance, to be able to commercially exploit that spare bandwidth in cloud infrastructure? So huge changes in terms of what the customers need to be looking at in their business models going forward.
Neil, interesting. You talk of customers.
Yes.
Who is the customer? Are we talking traditional broadcasters, an expanded definition of that, new customers? Who do you see as your customers?
We're trying to take a broad perspective, and that was a very deliberate aspect of the rebrand of our business, that it was Snell Advanced Media, not Snell Legacy Broadcast. So I'll check that acronym, make sure it doesn't move. But so we are focused on a more diverse customer base.
Yeah.
I think we did a piece of marketing that we sold something to Google, but it was actually a switcher to drive this screen in their canteen. But we're trying to get there, and we are looking at the sort of new platform providers. So Right now, as a business, we're looking to remain as a technology provider. We're not looking to offer hosted services, and we're currently looking to provide technology to service providers so we're one step behind offering a direct hosted service. And so, yeah, many of our customers are speaking here today, be that the end broadcasters, be that the service providers or other media companies.
Right. And would you still say you're a sort of, capital is wrong because you're not always selling hardware, but are you sort of one-off payment or are you pay-per-use at all?
That's the transition we're going through in terms of the commercial models. So we are talking already in terms of resolutions of having broadcast channels being paid for at a day resolution.
Okay.
Not quite down to hours and minutes yet, but at a day resolution, we're looking at those commercial models.
Okay. Simon, I'm expecting a somewhat different perspective from you.
Hopefully so, a little different. So Simon Frost, I have the pleasure of heading up marketing and trying to explain, I think, to the world a lot about what Ericsson's doing. It's a fascinating journey because next year will be the 10-year anniversary of Ericsson investing in TV and media. I came in through the first acquisition, and so 2017 will be that anniversary. And of course, Ericsson had a very clear vision, a very clear focus to invest and grow in a sector it thought and believes, and it is, growing faster than the telecom sector, and sees this enormous opportunity with the explosion of video and media generally, and how to mesh those things together. And many of you hopefully are familiar with many of the companies that Ericsson's bought to invest in this space. And it's built up its capabilities in really three core areas, and I think particularly one I get to sponsor, which I'm pleased about, is we do a lot of focus around consumer research, because I think so much of this business is about pleasing the end consumer and keeping them happy. So I think looking at what's happening in the industry, where the consumers are going, how they're going to consume media, what they want, I think that's an ever more complex challenge. So I think that's been one pillar of strategy. The other, of course, then is a heavy products investment focus, particularly next generation technologies and leveraging those technologies. So ICT technologies, cloud technologies, a lot of the portfolio has all been focused around that. And it's kind of interesting metaphor that the first acquisition Ericsson made was the biggest hardware compression vendor there was. And the latest acquisition we've made is the software compression vendor. So we've kind of bookended that whole story of software-defined that we looked at in the last panel, a discussion about software-defined. And then the third pillar really is all about services, because literally everybody, all of us are on this transformation journey, and so having the services capabilities to do that. And so big acquisition, of course, that we're very proud of in the UK with Red Bee. So we're now, broadcasting over 500 TV channels in overall. So I think, it's been a big investment focus, and I think that's what, from our customers' perspective, we look to serve everybody in the industry very equally, and I think it is applying that insights, it's applying the capabilities that we've got and the services, wrapping that around and just helping customers go on that journey.
Right. Interesting. I want to push you a bit further because, one of the things, there's been a lot of talk about how more analytics, understanding the customer, whether or not they're a B2B customer or an end user consumer. You can't always rely on asking people what they want, can you? So there must be a slightly more sort of insightful approach.
That's the understatement of the week.
Yeah. It must be more to it than just analysing what your customers are telling you. How do you add that extra spice into it to surprise them, I guess, with things that they didn't know they wanted?
Well, I think you're right we're taking this in two areas. So I think the consumer research we do, yes, it's anecdotal. So how much do you spend? What do you do? What do you want to do next year? Do you understand quality? Do you want things on demand? How do you spend your time?
Right.
So a lot of it is asking the end consumer, what do they do? And of course, it's not the same as measuring what they do. I agree with you. And I think there are others that do that as well. So I think it's great. This is really insights offered for free to the industry to understand you and I at home and what we want next week. Yeah. If we look at analytics, I think certainly from where this industry is going, if you look at where digital marketing has already gone, analytics is going to place, and data is going to place a very fundamental part in content discovery, in recommendation, in terms of search, in terms of matching together all of the deep dive aspects of types of content with all of the aspects around the consumer, the viewer. Where are they? What are they using? What device? What mood are they in? Sure. And blending those. And analytics, I think, is going to enable you to do that whole customer care piece, that whole recommendation piece, that whole life cycle piece. And I'm a huge believer that will be an enormous differentiator in the future in
Right.
terms of the service of television. I know we're going to come on to that perhaps, but for me it's going to be a massive, massive differentiator.
Hopefully pleasantly surprising them as well from time to time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you ask about surprise. It's we have a concern. One of our research team that looks at this consumer research, his favourite word is serendipity, and he keeps scratching his head, and he always says, if we're going to have amazing recommendation, we're going to do all these things. How do we still get serendipity, which is the channel flipping and just getting the positive surprise of seeing something? So, we're going to have to work that in to the analytics and to the recommendations so that we still get that positive surprise. Yeah. So there's a long way for us to go, I think, in terms of programmatic recommendation.
Michael, your perspective on this?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Michael Harrit. I'm leading up our marketing for Sony's professional media solutions in Europe. And that's a really wide business. So just to frame that a little bit, that's from your prosumer camcorders to your highly professional system cameras, software systems, switches, the whole lot, so to say. And we're trying to look at the industry from three different perspectives where we think it's moving right now. One is image, which we already discussed today around HDR and how the whole image evolution is. The other one is IP, which has also been discussed previously today. And our last focus point is around workflows in general. And the way we go into workflows is more from a business perspective, so to say. We see a big interest with our customers for more insight. For many years, it has been around managing your asset, your growing assets, building archives and search systems and whatnot. And now it's kind of shifting from the technical or focus to more the operational part of it, driven from business decision makers that craving insights. So we're moving our focus from looking at assets more to looking to insights and how these insights are helping creating more efficient business. We see a polarization in the way that we do production. In one end, we have the very high-end production. We saw BT Sports around UHD offering. We talked about HDR earlier and so on, 4K. On the other end, it's more your day-to-day, business. It's a media factory. So not a lot of creative people like this term, but it is a factory. And this factory needs to be run like a lean, mean machine, driving efficiencies and shifting money from technology and less efficient operation into acquiring more content, more rights, and so on to capture the market. So we're looking into the concept of what we call a media operation management approach, kind of your next generation of MAM system. So this is also a software-centric part, and not all our customers understand that Sony is also a company that encompasses, let's say, the software-centric approach, the optimization of workflows and business efficiency, and not, let's say, only a camera company. So this is where we are seeing that the long-term business strategy kind of resonates with our customers.
That's interesting to hear in terms of the new products you're offering to people. Are you also involved in looking at new business models in terms of the way in which you get your revenues?
We are, we're looking at the traditional software models like, as we know from the IT industry, obviously. But we also have opportunities to be more, surgically focused on specific needs where we can insert special license models in our cameras, so you kind of, it's more like a platform approach. When you're partnering up with somebody, it's less than just buy and sell, component by component. It's kind of, you buy into a platform, but you don't necessarily want to pay the full amount. So this is kind of pay-per-usage, if you like, or pay-per-need kind of model that we're looking into. It's not easy, because the wider the system gets, the more complex the license model can be. But we are looking into this kind of new business models.
I also hear from the discussions we're having today and elsewhere that there's more a question of supplying more generic technology that evolves over time. So you've got to have a longer term relationship with your customers, because what you first deliver to them might evolve and become something different or have extra capability as time goes on. So.
That's true, and I think, as we all see in the industry, is that building on commoditized IT also makes some of our businesses less profitable, if you like, in terms of just handing over hardware. So we need to move to a more software and services-centric model.
Neil, you wanted to come back on
I
that?
was just going to say an example of that is on the back of the BBC Three migration from on-air to online. One of the questions we were asked was, could you have the level of software licensing agility where today they're licensing a linear broadcast channel, but that might go online in a couple of years' time, and then they want to turn those software licenses into transcode capability or CMS capability. So, I must admit, when we were asked the question, we hadn't considered that, but the breadth of what you mean by an agile software license is quite broad if you start considering those type of shifts.
Now we're going to have two viewpoints from people who've got a real chance to look at what's happening from a more helicopter view. Martyn, your
Yeah, sure. So I work at EY, I'm Martyn Whistler, and many of you will know EY or Ernst Young as we used to be as a big accounting firm. We obviously have the audit part of our business, the tax, the transactions part of our business, and increasingly what we call the advisory or the consulting part of our business, and work right across the board with a lot of media companies in all different sectors. And I think increasingly what we're doing, and this is really where my role comes in, is to step back from that and say, what is the context? What are the trends that we're seeing in the industry? What's happening? What are companies doing, and what are they looking out for, and how are they evolving and adapting? And I think listening to what Simon had to say in particular, talking about putting the customer at the center and that customer-centric approach is really, really interesting. We sort of ask the question, do you know what your customer wants or what they think they want? And those two things are very, very different. And so how do you get under the skin of what that actually means? So when you talk about things like analytics, how do you create the right analytics platform so that you're understanding what your customers are looking for, what the end user is interested in? And ultimately, knowing what that end user is interested in is not enough. So we're seeing just a little caveat. For years, the media industry has talked about that anytime, anywhere solution for content, delivering it to the customer. And I think we've moved well beyond that. I think that notion presupposes a sort of build it and they will come environment. Let's put the content on something and the customer can choose to watch it. I think where we've moved to now is a model of engagement, whereby the customer is there doing something. They will have their phone in their hand. Some of you have your phone in your hand right now. How, as a media company, do you actively engage with that person at the point at which they need to see the media content, rather than just passively putting it out there and hoping that they find you? So that shift has really changed, and analytics will be a big part of underpinning that. And then the second thing that we think about is obviously the wider industry context. So what does this mean in terms of competition within the industry? What does it mean for consolidation within the industry? How are we seeing new entrants emerging? How are we seeing new disruptive business models emerging? Because we can talk about the customer as much as we like, and we absolutely should, but if you can't monetize that, if you can't find a business model off the back of that that's going to give you enough margin to grow, then it's a bit of an academic conversation. So we take that second phase and really say, where's the business model around this?
Actually, it's interesting. I often think of our industry as quite fragmented, with a few big players at the top end and a very, very long tail of smaller players. And that almost applies whether it's in the technology supply or the content delivery side of things. Do you see us as a fragmented industry in terms of delivery to consumers, and are we going to see more consolidation? What's your vision there?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of industries are fragmented, and particularly when you get to the content end, because you've got creativity, and often creativity is one guy with a great idea, and that necessarily leads you to a long tail. And the same can be true in the technology industry. How can I find that new idea and that new thing? But these are industries that have a huge long history of consolidation, and deals are happening all the time. We saw a lot of frantic M&A activity last year, the year before, and we'll continue to see that. I think what underpins all of that is that scale is important in this industry, and you only have to look really at the front end of who is actually winning in this space. Whether it's YouTube or Facebook or any of those guys, Google, etc., Amazon, even Netflix. Netflix a few years ago, even 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about them as a bit of a Ponzi scheme, just add another subscriber and you can pay for the last one. That sort of approach, just continue to grow as much as you can. But they've got to a scale now where their level of content investment dwarfs the kind of things that we can see from a single market media company. So yes, more consolidation, but by necessity, scale is important. Yeah. So it's a function of where the industry is going.
I'm going to abuse my position here and ask a question of the audience, which is a bit of a distraction, but who has actually seen Marco Polo on Netflix? Can I see a show of hands? Right, a small number. For those of you that have, this may be interesting. Those who haven't are hopefully also interesting. One of the things that the critics said of that was that Netflix had done too much analysis and they tried to throw a bit of everything into the program, and that it had no real focus and it was a bit bland because it was trying to please everybody. So,
but I think that's the challenge, right? And it's, not all data is created equal, and not all experiences are created equal. And if you look at where a lot of the consumer experience is going to, if you compare a Netflix, for example, to or an Amazon to something like a classic cable operator, and I won't, maybe more in the US. At the moment, the experience is all about taking the friction out of that process. You turn on your mobile phone, you don't even need to put a password anymore, you just tap your thumb and you can buy something just by tapping your thumb a couple of times. It's about removing the friction from the process. So what Netflix has done with some of its content, and what a lot of other people have done with their content, and particularly their user experience, is to remove that friction. Yeah. But sometimes, I agree with you, they go a little bit too far in that, and they overanalyze, and the data becomes the driver of the content, and that's when you start to lose the audience.
Well, you have to make up your own view. Actually, I enjoyed Marco Polo, but certainly the critics said that it was a bit of everything and nothing to anybody. But Russell, your take on all of this?
What can I say that hasn't been said already? I started broadcast innovation during the last recession. Democracy is not for everybody. That's what I heard yesterday. And I started the company based on deep experience of media, what was called media management, MAM then. And very, very rapidly, MAM has gone from being a noun to being a verb. All of this just requires better media management. We can write it down on a pencil and paper, or we can use $1 million of software to organize our media or organize our metadata. But the two big things that I think have driven, and perhaps to try and drive on what we've all said, I think that, and it came up earlier with Keith from Channel 4, which is that there's no doubt that there's a procession from secure linear pounds to very accessible digital pennies. And so many organisations in our business are defending their position and consolidating their position, making the best they can. That applies as much to suppliers as to broadcasters and what broadcasters have become or are becoming. And it also applies to the insurgents that can access those digital pennies and this big data or intelligent use of subscriber data. That's where we're seeing the insurgents pop up and achieve outstanding success. I think the challenge in the last few years is that everybody's trying to cut through everybody else's business model. Whether that's on the supply side or the customer side, everybody wants everybody else's lunch. So it means we'll never make sense of it. It's now, for broadcasters, it's now an age to get your share. And I think, to your points about scale, I think it's scale. When I came back from NAB this year, scale is one of the most misleading things. Because we all understand the technical possibilities of scale, and we've all taken the bait of cloud and virtualized services and what it could be. But certain businesses are only supposed to be certain sizes. Some enormous US networks, consolidating rapidly, can access the world. They'll benefit from agility, from elasticity, from workflow orchestration, from media logistics. They can grow. Other, what we would call traditional broadcasters, can only broadcast in country. They've only acquired rights and inventory, the value of media, to broadcast within their country. So I'm giving you two very distinct bookends. You see pay TV providers, multi-channel, cable, being bigger or smaller, multi-region or multi-territory. But it is impossible to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
And I would say, sorry.
Yeah, keep going.
And I would say also, I saw the standards discussion earlier. I would say it is impossible to standardize it all as well.
But I don't think it's about standardizing, I think you're right. Everything has its niche and its place, and it has to find that. But I think a number of things. One is in any market, you talk about the race to market share, that kind of thing. I think you're seeing incumbents under pressure trying to retain their scale, and you're seeing the new entrants essentially trying to build scale, whether organically or otherwise. And I think the thing about scale, as you say, whether it's in the market, the region, the globally, whatever, the competitive pressures that are on businesses right now require a level of investment from those businesses that necessitates the kind of efficiencies. Some of those efficiencies can only be derived when you get to a certain scale.
Possibly, I agree, but efficiency means nothing without cost reduction. And that's,
yeah, I think the two are sort of in some ways euphemisms for similarly the same thing.
But for the supplier community here, who've worked very hard to gain efficiency for core customers, that's turned out not to be enough.
Let me pick up on the efficiency side, because someone maybe from the audience, you guys might remind me who this was, but it must have been almost 10 years ago. There was a rather heretical gentleman in charge of one of the Belgian broadcasters who said our business is going to become controlled by SAP, that's going to be, it's going to be a production engine, it's going to be like any other manufacturing industry. Neil, is that the way it's going?
Yes, we've talked about the term automation. So if we put our traditional broadcast hat on, automation is about executing a linear playlist for a linear broadcast channel. Whereas increasingly now we're looking at automation is about the automation of content production and content delivery to a whole host of platforms. And then the automation is required because that's the only way you can cost effectively scale or efficiently scale, whichever term you want to use. So absolutely, it's about taking the whole value chain of media and automating it. And another term for automation is turning it into the factory, which Michael referenced. So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Michael, we're turning ourselves into production lines, very similar to motor cars or whatever?
I think we are on some types of content. The really high end of the scale, I don't think so. I think technology and also hardware will be driving the high end. You also showed in your opening speech around cinema and the threat from that. I think this is still driving the high end of content production, and that cannot just be automated and made into a business case. But the 90% of what you're doing, for the other part of what you're doing, either providing to a platform aggregator or as part of a broadcast or whatever, that needs that efficiency. And I agree with Neil that to say, automation and automating your processes is one pivotal tool to do that, and that is built on insights. And the difference between earlier on is that insight was run by operators with either a creative or technical perspective on it. So what we see now is the business who wants back for the decisions. We don't want technician engineering to run the business. We want business people to run the business. So when we showcase in our tools some of the dashboards we have and so on, get a lot of traction from, when some guy has dragged along the CFO or whatever to IBC, that, come and look the kind of insights we can get to optimize the factory, so to say. So we feel that this is resonating right now.
Right. And guys, I'm going to come back to areas of consumer and that area as well, so it's not being forgotten. But before we do, some of this technology can cost more than its previous traditional generation. Are you having those conversations saying, yeah, I know it's going to cost you more, but in terms of your operational efficiency and so on, it's going to save you money in the long term?
It's fantastically cost effective.
That's a tough discussion though, isn't it?
Saves a lot of operational expense. I think it's just the costs are moving with inside an organisation. So if you are going to automate a process and alleviate the need for, let's be friendly and say, adding a load of headcount rather than removing it. Yeah. If you can automate the process, yes, you might be spending a bit more on software licenses, but you're not ballooning your cost base in terms of staff and people. And just to touch on the earlier point, there will always be a strong requirement for creative people to create compelling content. When we talk about the automating the processes of the factories, is the packaging of that content and the delivery of that content and maybe even branding it.
It's what's better described as media logistics.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a big piece between content creation and distribution that didn't have a description. And when you see the role of AWS and Amazon Web Services, that's purely what they're looking at, is highly replicable transfers, functions, transcodes, format. So I think that's a key area where analytics, predictive behaviour, and what we used to call automation, we're not making schedules into playlists anymore.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily soft, though, to say, because if you're an ambitious organisation, the ability to do more with the same resources is a pretty good way of approaching things rather than just saving money. Michael?
Just to add to that, we also get a little pushback from countries in Europe with maybe lower cost for people, saying, do we really need this? We're not going to throw more people at the issue. And then you talk about other added values like, the traditional ones, time to air, like in news, to say it's not only about cost saving, it's also about investing in getting there to the market first, either in news or, just...
Or in UHD Sports.
Or in UHD Sports. So there are, content types that also benefits from a more lean process approach.
That's where we are today, and where we're moving to is a world that is significantly more complex than we've ever seen before in terms of where the audience is, how you reach them, the formats, all the rest of it. We all know that, but that complexity is in and of itself an opportunity, right? You can find new markets, but you're not going to be the best in that market if you're the second, third, or fourth person to get to it. So you need to get there. If you see a content opportunity, you need to exploit that wherever that audience is. And in making an investment in that is important. And what we're seeing, or the conversations we're having around things like automation and using robots to replicate processes, etc., is about taking some cost out of the business in that place and then being able to reinvest it in other areas so that you can realise that opportunity.
Sorry.
I was going to say just quickly, you talked about cost, but you started a conversation about pricing, I think, and in terms of more expensive, I think what we're also seeing is our industry grappling with the shift towards a software business model and a payment model and a SaaS model and also a services model. So I think, our industry is incredibly used to hardware, and of course we talk about software defined, we talk about the shift to software, but I think there's also a big financial mental shift in capex write-downs and investing in capital equipment versus a software business model. There was an earlier example of the Amazon model, I think it was, or a cloud model where we're looking at a customer example where I think the customer analysed it was going to cost half as much as a capex solution to effectively get a cloud model, and thinking, well, I've paid for half of a capex system. I might as well pay the other half and have a capex system. So I think that's the other thing we're also doing is it's for us as vendors to be able to communicate well the fact that you're going to pay differently over a different life cycle for value-added features and services.
All right. Chance for some comments from the audience. We've still got some minutes left. I've got plenty of questions, but yours are more interesting than mine, I suspect. Don't be shy. You are going to be shy, aren't you? I have the ability to pick on people if they don't get volunteers. One there.
Chris Colley from BBC Global News Limited. Question for the panel really around the market conditions and do you see the importance of technology vendors and service providers forming partnerships being quite crucial to both their survivals in the future?
Yes.
Or now?
Yes, I think that's probably what this event is targeted at, and many other alliances in the industry. The challenge comes where marketing wants to commoditize us and tell us it's all the same, but that those partnerships need to add some value and do something special and perhaps unique. And I think that's very difficult. In fairness to the suppliers, we work in probably one of the most innovative industries in the world, which has been through more transformations than many in such a short space. And everyone's a customer. Everyone has opinion. In the room here, we all have our own preferences. I'm surprised something that hasn't come up today is apps. I watch most visual entertainment, which we used to call broadcast, and I pay for it via apps. I like the BBC Radio app. It has a dial, like an analog dial. That's great. I watch most things through Sky's app because it's my broker for online. And UK TV's managed to, with their brand new app, has managed to wean me off of even Sky's app. So those partnerships, those kind of alliances are moving very fast now. And they're directly affecting a viewer and their behaviour and how they spend their money, perhaps more than IP is.
Yeah.
It's a variant of the consolidation point earlier, that in actual fact we're a very small industry, and you look at the sort of behemoths that we're now having to compete with, we need to be careful. We need scale, but we'll never get their scale. And one of the points I wanted to make earlier was also we need to be careful of our perspective from where we're starting to where we need to be. And we don't want to be too myopic, because when we talk about big data, I mean, it's a huge step forward for our industry to know who's watched our commercial and when they watched it and what they did. Okay, that's big data to us. I was at a conference where, Google, based on the way people move the mouse and click through web pages, can determine sex and age of the person doing that without them having to put any personal information in. That's big data to them, where they're tracking the mouse movement. Again, if you look at the two different perspectives, there are competitions, so how do we scale to meet that challenge?
I can also reflect on your questions to say that we are doing some commercial proof of concepts, if you like, with partners, because we see that there is a mixed need for. So we have a cloud service that is, more popular maybe in the US than in Europe, but we still have a lot of customers here as well, doing thousands of transactions every day. But we see that, broadcasters, especially, they have a request for kind of, a hybrid cloud or on-premise cloud. And in this case, we're a little bit short in how to deliver this. We don't want to go into that kind of business as Sony. So the only way to go into it is through partners. But it needs to be commercial viable. So we're looking into different things with different partners in different countries in Europe. So a good question.
Right. Any other questions from the floor? It's actually quite difficult to see from up here with the lights, but I think the answer is no for the moment. I will come back for one more chance, but coming back to consumer behaviour and business development, and I guess start with you, Simon, on this one. I mean, are we talking about an evolution of broadcast, or is there a whole new category of consumer behaviour around video happening? What do you think? Is this new business, or is it an evolution from what we've known in the past?
I'm trying to unpick the framing of that question, I think. Everything's in evolution, but I think it happens faster. And I think that's what we see from the consumers. And I think the lines blur for them. It's still the same industry it always was. It's still a simple entertainment business. It's still content they want. The content to them and their behaviours know no bounds. So if they can't find it, they will borrow it. Right. Even if they haven't paid for it. So I think no matter what happens, it's a simple, consumption-orientated business of the consumers adapting their behaviour and adapting things to however their lives fit. And I think we, as an industry, and I think our customers overall, so I think the people that create this amazing content and serve it up and chop it up and deliver it, have to do that ever faster, ever better, ever more responsive towards these consumer behaviours. I mean, we did another one of our little survey aspects as a top-up to our big survey, and it was really interesting that we've actually got this on camera. I think we're going to release this. So one of the audiences we talked to about what they do with TV and media and how they enjoy consumption of video said they're watching episodes in their car whilst they're commuting, because commuting's so boring. So they've actually got the phone on the dashboard and they're actually watching their content commuting. So, it knows no bounds, it will not know any bounds, and I think that's why, for us, I think, as our overall industry, it's all about keeping up with that. And I don't think anything's broken, but I think for once, having been in this industry a long time, what I do see is the industry's not alone in setting the agenda on the time frame. To your point, Neil, about these global organisations, they all want a part of this action. They want a piece of this. I think we've just had a YouTube re-announcement of live streaming support back on their platform. All of these giants with huge, huge financial resources are innovating all the time to encourage media consumption on their platforms. So, you know, it's not up to the TV industry just to do it at its pace. We've got to get faster.
I genuinely have been in a taxi in Italy when the driver was watching TV whilst driving the road. It's a scary experience. But I guess, sorry, yeah, my question was maybe a little bit obscure, but we're seeing, at one time it was said that some of these new businesses are going to be cannibalizing regular broadcast, but we've actually seen there tend to be add-on rather than that in many cases. And also it's given people opportunities to look at niche areas that just weren't available when all you had were over-the-air mass market.
I think what you're seeing is a whole range of new experiences emerge. So I don't necessarily see that you're cannibalizing TV in that way. I mean, if you look at the viewing numbers, you can get some stats on it going down gradually, but it's not, you know, it doesn't appear to be, you know, in its death throes just yet. I think we can breathe a sigh of relief around that. But if you look at these other experiences, you know, where people are engaging on watching apps, etc., you know, on the commute to work, you know, literally, I mean, we're doing some work at the moment looking at, you know, autonomous vehicles. So when you are literally not driving, what will you do with your time? You know, and that frees up literally billions of hours a year in terms of content consumption. So that's an entirely additive experience. And I think what will be telling is that we've got that generation coming through now, and I know there's lots have been discussed about generational shifts and that kind of thing, but that sort of Generation Z, as they call them, which have genuinely grown up with the mobile phone, the YouTube, the digital experience, and now they're reaching a tipping point where they're starting to leave home and you know, move into their own apartments and that kind of thing. I'm a very firm believer that we can overcomplicate the television. And a lot of people will want to go home, sit down, watch the television, and just view it as a fairly passive experience. They may choose what they want to watch, but it's a passive experience of just enjoying it. Be interesting to see whether that new generation adopt the same passive experience. It'd be interesting to see whether they even buy a television.
Very good question, and it's one that I've missed, so I'm going to abuse the time and just see if there are any other comments. I mean, there's a lot of debate around this, that the younger generation don't understand the shared experience, the big screen in the same that we do. Anyone got any thoughts on that? Is that ever going? Will they adopt the previous generation's habits, or is that a fundamental shift?
Well, apparently I have two teenage sons, but I occasionally hear shuffling around in the upstairs, but they're never in the lounge watching the TV, so...
One answer to the question.
Shared experience is shared between their peers, not necessarily the whole family group.
They're still sharing, but in a different way. Michael, what do you think?
No, I think for 25 years I've heard the television pronounced dead, you know, like every 5 years. And as we heard earlier, that it's a very resilient media. So even though as a 16-year-old or whatever, you don't, you know, watch the big telly, you will do that, and it is something that is, you know, collecting people. So it's not a black and white either or. It's an add-on, as you're saying.
Could it change fundamentally or not?
No, I'm not yet ready to prescribe the death of television. I think it's, you know, it's still there for some time to come, and I think, you know, generations will embrace it.
You're going to have lots of chance to talk a little later, but just on this point.
My two youngest call it the punishment box. Okay, but when they can't have their screens, but within 30 seconds they're hooked. And they're gazing at the telly for 3 hours watching those ads, which is good.
Gentlemen, some fascinating insights. Please thank our panel.